I'm sorry, I have failed this FTP comparison test. I set the bar too high for myself and I paid the price, but I still think the data shows some pretty interesting findings. This is the 5th video that I've made exploring the benefits of riding with shorter cranks, and I've linked the previous videos in the description below if you'd like to learn more. Quick background, I've decided to replace the 175mm cranks on my specialised Tarmac 61cm frame with 160mm cranks. Why? Primarily because it helps to reduce my hip arthritis pain from cycling, as my knee to chest angle is more open at the top of the pedal stroke. And out of academic curiosity, I've left 175mm cranks on my other bike, which is a 62cm frame Trek Amonda, and this allows me to run some comparison tests between the two. So far I've looked at improvements to hip angle from a bike fit perspective with shorter cranks, and the effects on my heart rate on a steady state ride below FTP for 30 minutes, and the difference in my power output on a full-on, out of the saddle, uphill smash fest. All of these tests came out in favour of smaller cranks, and in some cases by quite some margin. So my aim in today's test was to do a 1-hour ride approximately at my FTP on my Wahoo Kicker core. First of all on my Tarmac with 160mm cranks, and then a few days later on my Amonda with 175mm cranks. I'm comparing the heart rate data for the two rides on the two different crank lengths and drawing some conclusions for my FTP. But as I said, I bit off more than I could chew. A few years ago, I did the Wahoo Sufferfest 4-dimension power test, cycling fitness test,
which is evil.
This told me at the time that my FTP was 347 watts. I was happy with that. Since then, I have moved out of my 40s and into my 50s, and I've caught COVID. I reckon COVID has had some long-term effects on my cycling fitness, but that's another story. Anyway, for this test, I thought I'd set my target at 300 watts on ergo mode. Nice round number. Here's how it went. First of all, with my Tarmac, the 160mm cranks, I did a few minutes warm up at 100 watts, got off the bike for a few minutes, and got back on and started the 1-hour test. A full-on 1-hour FTP test on an indoor trainer is no one's idea of fun. I gave it a pretty decent effort, but ultimately I stopped at 50 minutes. At that point, my heart rate was sitting at around 178 beats per minute. The highest heart rate that I've seen appear on my Garmin at any time in the last few years is 184. So this would put me working at 97% of my current max heart rate. I didn't have the legs for the last 10 minutes. I know. Just harden up. Anyway, 4 days later, I've repeated the exact same test on my Trek Amonda with the 175mm cranks. I've had the same preparation and lead up, with the day before being a complete rest day. I did the same warm up, a few minutes at 100 watts, and then I set off with the ergo mode set at 300 watts. Straight away, this felt harder. And I knew when I saw my heart rate bouncing around the 180 mark, well before 30 minutes was up, that I was in trouble. At the half-hour mark, I pulled the plug. I perhaps could have managed for a few more minutes, but there is no way that I could have sat on 98% of my max heart rate for the next 20 minutes. Disappointing. I was really hoping to be able to hold on to 300 watts for an hour for at least one of these tests. Getting old. Okay, but what does this all mean? I think it's fair to say that on that first test on my Tarmac with the 160mm cranks, my FTP would have been pretty close to 300 watts. On that day, in that test, if I had someone to ride against on Zwift or in the room next to me to push me, I'm pretty sure I could have held on for that final 10 minutes. But on that second test, on my Amonda, with the 175mm cranks and my heart rate touching on 180 beats per minute at the halfway point, there is no way. If I scroll through the performance data on my Strava file on that first test with the shorter cranks, I can see that I hit 170 beats per minute heart rate, just after 20 minutes on the bike. By comparison, on the Emonda with the longer cranks, I can see that I reached 170 beats per minute heart rate before the 10-minute mark. And at the 20-minute mark, I was pumping blood at 176 beats per minute. At the 30-minute mark with the shorter cranks, I was only at 174 beats per minute. Whereas on the longer cranks, at the 30-minute mark where I ended the test, my heart rate was sitting at 180 beats per minute, 6 beats per minute more. So given that the definition of FTP is the highest amount of power that you can maintain over a 1-hour period, it looks quite obvious to me that with the 160mm cranks, the shorter cranks, my FTP is going to be way superior than what I'd get with my 175mm cranks that I've always ridden. I would guess that the FTP difference between the two setups is probably close to 10 watts. Okay, cool, but how relevant is that in the real world? Well, I've done a little bit of road racing here in recent years, and I can attest that at the top end of the exertion scale, a 6 beat per minute differential heart rate is actually pretty huge. I've had times during a race where I've looked at my Garmin where I'm barely hanging on, pushing the absolute maximum that I could sustain. And my Garmin is showing my heart rate at 170. Whereas other times, I've looked at my Garmin when I'm feeling quite comfortable, and I've seen heart rate data at 164, 165, and I'm feeling quite able to push harder. That 6 beat per minute differential really does mean a lot at the top end of the endurance performance scale. However much a 6 beat per minute differential translates to in watts, it is definitely significant. All from 15mm shorter cranks. Wow! So I am bracing myself for a harder test. And yes, I plan to do the Wahoo System 4-dimension power test with both of these bikes to get the algorithm's assessment of the performance differential between the shorter and longer crank lengths. This will obviously give me more data than just my FTP, so I think it'll be very interesting. Those of you who have done the 4-dimension power test before will know exactly how horrific it is. I plan to do it twice in 1 week. Wish me luck.